After many hours with this game, I have to believe that TemTem must be one of the best monster catching games that money can currently buy. That said, I do have some issues with it, as it seems to cater much more to the smallest subsets of the monster catching fanbase. The game is so feature rich and packed full of content that it genuinely puts some of the more recent Pokemon games to shame, but at the same time I think it pushes out a lot of the more casual fans. That's not 100% a bad thing, of course. It really does depend on what kind of player you are and what you're looking for in a game of this genre. I played this game on PS5 and it looks great, runs very well, and gives you up to 300 hours of turn-based monster taming content. It's really hard to argue with what you're given for the price, which is why I'm recommending it. The catch that I mentioned in the title, however, is that the game can feel much more difficult or grindy than it should be and seems to push players to engage with the more hardcore systems. If that's what you're looking for, then look no further, but I think for the vast majority of casual fans, it may just end up being too much to deal with. So as this is a recommendation video, we're going to be taking a much more casual look at the game than I would have done in a full review. Just so you know, I didn't get a review code for this one. I actually bought it myself on release day, and I've done about, I'd say, 22 to 25 hours in it at this point. As I was playing through the game, I just ended up getting a lot of thoughts on the subject, so I wanted to share them, and I think the intro that you just heard really does sum it up pretty well. It's a great game for the fans who like to engage with the breeding systems, EV training, competitive battles, and all that stuff, but for the average player, I think it might be considered too difficult, too grindy, or perhaps too involved. The thing is though, that's absolutely going to depend on who the player is and what they're looking for. So let's try and unpack this a little bit. First of all, I'm not going to go into the story due to spoilers, but it's got a slightly more adult tone to it, which is probably aimed at the people who grew up with the original Pokemon games. I won't be going over the core gameplay either, and that's because it's literally the same basic setup as Pokemon, right down to picking one starter from a choice of 3 and the catching mechanics. If you know what Pokemon is, then you're going to know what this is all about. You walk around in the game world talking to NPCs, battling them, leveling up your monsters, evolving them, etc, etc. Genre-wise, it's a monster catching or monster taming MMO with turn-based battles, but I think for this video, we'll focus on what TemTem does differently. In most monster collecting games, each creature's moves have limited uses. In Pokemon, for example, the moves cost 1 PP per use, and when you run out, you can't use the move again until you visit a Pokemon Center or restore the uses with Ether. A lot of games use this system, but TemTem uses a stamina mechanic instead. Each move, or technique as this game calls them, uses a set amount of stamina, and they generally use quite a lot. You can't actually perform that many moves before running out of stamina, and that's by design. When it does run out, you can order your TemTem to miss a turn and rest, which regens a small chunk of their stamina. If a TemTem uses a move that costs more stamina than they currently have available, the excess will be taken from their HP instead. So I suppose you could refer to it as a bit of a risk and reward kind of thing, and it did make me think a bit more strategically about which attacks to use and when. Some of the more powerful moves and abilities have a delay on their use, which stops you from just spamming the strongest ones over and over. This, when combined with the stamina system, gives you a lot more to consider, not just when battling, but regarding which moves to equip. All of the moves that a TemTem learns are interchangeable, meaning that you can swap in and out anything they've ever learned freely whenever you want. Another thing you've probably noticed is that you can see a lot of other characters in the game world all running around on the same adventure as you. These are all other players all moving in real time. The game is always online, meaning that if your internet goes down, you won't be able to play it, unfortunately. You can interact with these players if you want to in the form of trading, battling, and playing the story in co-op. You'll be able to send friend requests and hop into each other's game world where everything will be scaled down to the lowest level player. It also limits exploration and game features to the player with the least progress as well. Now, I personally don't really need this game to be an MMO. I'm perfectly content in Pokemon, Koromon, Nexomon, and the like to play through the entire game on my own solo. That said, it does make the world feel a bit more lived in and just, I don't know, active, I guess. It's like when you're playing something like Destiny 2, which is a game I log into most days of the week, and you see other players running around doing their own thing. It does give you that sense of a shared world, and while it's not essential to me, it is a nice thing to experience. Evolution works in a similar way to most other games, but instead of leveling up a TemTem to a specific level, they'll need to gain a certain number of levels while in your care. For example, I picked Crystal for my starter TemTem, and it doesn't evolve at level 16 and level 36 like a Charmander from Pokemon would. Instead, Crystal will evolve into its second form after gaining 30 levels, and then evolve into its final form after another 21 levels. So if you caught a Crystal at, let's say, level 10, it wouldn't evolve until level 40 and then again at level 61. This mechanic isn't exclusive to this TemTem either, it's actually the default evolution system. Each TemTem can spawn in the wild with one of two possible traits. My Crystal got the Amphibian trait when it was given to me at the start of the game, which gives it a speed +1 and an attack +2 if it gets hit with a water attack. The other trait it could have had was called Rested. This increases a TemTem's attack and special attack by 30% for the first 2 turns that it's on the battlefield. I think I may have actually gotten the less desirable trait for my Crystal, but I've never really been into resetting my game to get the best starter, so I just kind of went with it. When a TemTem evolves, it actually loses its current trait and gets a new one, which is again selected from a possible 2. The main campaign does include one singular form of EXP share in the form of the Coward's Cloak. Each TemTem can equip one gear item which have various effects. The Coward's Cloak is one such item, and it takes an equal portion of the EXP that was earned by the 2 active monsters and awards it to the TemTem with the cloak equipped. You can actually obtain 2 other forms of EXP share, but they're only found at the endgame and are designed to help you with training for the more difficult endgame activities. I haven't actually reached the full endgame yet, but I know for a fact that there are a ton of things to do within it. This includes full-on raids with a party of 3 to 5 players, which are called lairs. Endgame is one of those things that I can't really properly comment on as I haven't had any involvement with it yet, but just so you know, it does have one and it is quite extensive. TemTem was originally a Kickstarter game that got funded pretty quickly and then entered early access. It's actually been in early access right up until this console release, which is known as TemTem 1.0. The PC version of the game also just received the 1.0 update at the same time. This update brought loads of new content to the game, as well as a premium shop and a battle pass system. Now, you guys know how I feel about microtransactions and all that stuff. I am not a fan, to say the least. In TemTem, it doesn't feel too aggressive and it's certainly not mandatory, but the game is officially an MMO. This means ongoing server costs, development costs, and all that kind of stuff. And I completely understand that because, like Destiny, Elder Scrolls Online, or World of Warcraft, the company does need to make money to keep the content flowing. It's as simple as that. I would prefer that the game cost a single price and then you just paid for large expansions, but at the same time the game is priced as a budget title, so all in all it doesn't feel too scummy or greedy. It feels generally quite fair, not ideal of course, but fair. The pass contains a lot of visual customization items, cosmetics basically, and you can earn XP for the pass just by playing the game. Catching monsters, winning battles, completing quests, and more all contribute to the progression. There's also some XP boosts in the pass itself, as well as enough premium currency to purchase the next battle pass for free. There's also quite a lot of customization items in the game in general, numerous amounts of different clothes, accessories, and even your own house that you can decorate with hundreds of items. There are many stores dotted around the game world where you can buy furniture and decorations for your home with in-game money, and then set everything up the way you want to. The vast majority of battles are fought 2 versus 2, but there are of course some situations where that isn't the case, such as your opponent only owning a single strong TemTem, or if you're down to your last monster in your party. Having 2v2 battles is important as the game features a synergy system which provides bonuses and buffs simply for having 2 compatible TemTem on the field. These effects can include things like providing extra damage to certain attacks or increasing both TemTem's defense stat while they are both active. Creating a well-balanced team with good synergies can make all the difference in this game as it's close to being a requirement. The game seems to want you to switch up your party from location to location rather than focusing on one specific team. I wouldn't exactly call myself an expert, but the damage and difficulty both seem to be tuned in such a way that you'll need to edit your lineup in order to avoid frustration. And I don't know about you guys, but when I play games like this, I tend to just stick with monsters I like based on how they look. I rarely properly dig into their stats or try to make a well-rounded team, and I usually do just fine. I do occasionally swap one of my monsters out for another if I find a new one I like the look of, but generally I don't really do it. As an example, my other half always tries to make a team of Eevee evolutions in Pokemon games because, well, frankly she just loves them, and I always have to have a Charizard if he's available. TemTem doesn't really feel like that's much of an option unless you want to struggle through a lot of the fights. This is especially true for boss characters and dojos, which are this game's gyms. Don't get me wrong though, it's not like it's impossible to do or anything like that, but you do feel the struggle at times. At one point I had a somewhat balanced team and I out-leveled all of my opponent's TemTem by about 5 to 8 levels and I still lost. The dojo bosses don't seem to follow any specific type either, so it's not like you can just storm a fire dojo with water types because the enemy tamers own a mixture of types with moves of various types as well. In fact, my other half has decided to stop playing TemTem due to the game's difficulty and grind, and it's a shame because she really does like it, and she's someone who's beaten every Pokemon game since Gen 3 and games like Nexomon, but it just got too frustrating for her. She's generally a casual gamer, but when certain games come along, she ends up no-lifing them and really getting into them. So I guess you could argue that this game simply isn't for her, and I think that's fair. My only words of warning are that I think the vast majority of video game players out there in the world are casual gamers. That means that the structure of TemTem could turn off a lot of potential players, and that would be a real shame. It's not 100% guaranteed, of course. You could be a casual player and absolutely love the game. But if you're trying to decide on whether or not to buy it, I think this point should be taken into consideration. Performance-wise, it runs very well on the PS5, it looks really sharp and vibrant, and it provides a smooth 60 FPS experience. I did have around 3 or 4 crashes to the dashboard in about 20 or so hours of gameplay, and a bug that locked me in place behind 2 characters in the game world, which, isn't great, but it hasn't exactly ruined my experience. Often, as you're playing through the game, you may notice a little bit of slowdown when entering busy areas, and I don't think it's actually a problem to do with the frame rate. I think it's to do with the always online nature of the game. It's like it's stuttering while trying to sync up everything that's going on. It honestly does seem pretty bad at times, with it being most obvious when you enter or exit a building, but it very quickly sorts itself out. As far as I'm concerned, it is a bit annoying, but I don't think it's a big deal. And finally, before we move on to the conclusion, I do want to make myself 100% clear. I'm not saying that the game's kinda difficult and therefore bad. That's not my point at all. I think the game is actually brilliant. Not perfect, mind you, but it is pretty great. I continue to enjoy this game far more, and I mean far more, than a lot of the more modern Pokemon releases, especially Sword and Shield, which for me is still the worst mainline Pokemon game ever released. What I'm really trying to do here is give you some objective information with my own personal opinion thrown in from time to time. I do this in all of my videos in an effort to help you make up your own mind regarding a purchase of a specific game. With that in mind, to reiterate my earlier point, I think TemTem is a great game of the genre, one of the best in fact, but from my time with it, I think it does skew towards the more experienced players. This is not a problem, of course, I just think that it may be a little bit too much for casual players or younger fans. In my opinion, TemTem is a showcase of what can be accomplished within this genre when a developer actually cares to try. And look, I'm a lifelong fan of Pokemon. I was there when it all started and I absolutely love the franchise. Sadly though, I believe that the Pokemon Company is now releasing what is virtually the same game time after time. They do this because they know that it will sell incredibly well regardless of its quality. They have become utterly complacent, and it's funny because as good as TemTem is, I just don't think it'll ever be a serious rival to them. Ultimately, I'm enjoying TemTem a lot and I'm going to continue playing it. I just want all monster taming games to be great, Pokemon included. I really don't think players need to be tribal about the whole thing. I mean, if you like Pokemon, why wouldn't you like or at least try Nexomon, Coromon, or TemTem? We do actually have Scarlet and Violet on pre-order, and I will be reviewing them on the channel in November. They honestly do look quite good, but I genuinely, at this point, don't see a way for it to release and be actually better than TemTem as far as my tastes go. I suppose it remains to be seen, but we'll find out later in the year. In the meantime, I definitely do recommend TemTem. It's well made and has a lot of content, but please do consider my warnings regarding its difficulty. If you enjoy the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.